Space, repetition, and data. The amount of information an individual retains after learning something new can vary widely based on several factors. Learning method, the individual's cognitive abilities, the material's complexity, and the use of reinforcement techniques. However, a general model that gives us some insight into memory retention over time is the forgetting curve, conceptualized by Hermann Ebbinghaus in the late 19th century. Yeah, sorry if I butchered that name. Ebbinghaus' forgetting curve suggests that memory retention declines exponentially over time without any attempt to retain the information. Here's a rough outline of how retention might decrease over time if the learner does not review the material, especially when it comes to skill acquisition and retention of learning new Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu techniques for beginners. After 1 hour, retention can drop to around 50% of the material, depending on the complexity of the information and the individual's focus during the learning session. After 24 hours, retention can decrease further, with individuals remembering only about 20 to 30% of the material. After a week, without review, retention can decline to 10 to 15% of the original material learned. After a month, retention may stabilize around this time, but at a level where much of the detail is lost, and only the gist or a few details of what was learned might be remembered. To summarize, without any review or attempt to retain, a significant portion of new information can be forgotten within days to weeks. But with the application of effective review and repetition methods, it can greatly improve the retention of information over longer periods. For me, it used to be that every time I attend my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu class and after, I always feel like I barely was able to retain of what was taught at class. Also, factoring in if I barely follow up with what I learned and only show up to class 1 to 2 times a week within that week or so. In the end, I feel like I probably lost 100% of what I learned from that class. Just forget it all, and it just feels like a waste. And I just hate wasting good knowledge that I had been taught. But again, still pretty much my fault. So far in this video, I showed the process part of my method that helped me to comprehend and understand techniques much faster and better through tutorials. That is effective enough for me that I feel confident that I can still remember what I learned after almost sometimes a week without review. But still, I needed to absolutely guarantee that I won't forget anything in the long run. Whether it's been months or years, I needed an effective repetition review method to ensure everything that I memorized will not fade for a while and stay for the long term. Repetition in learning is important to maintain what you learn or memorize. It is often always best to review what you learn so that you can further add on and sharpen it with new materials and experience later on. The term for the brain is use it or lose it, meaning if you don't use or review the information that you just memorized, your brain will think it is not that important to hold on and will get rid of it. Even though I criticize repetition for being a terrible way to memorize new information, which I argue the process is more important, but repetition still plays an important role, and that is to review information. The most common and old way that I was taught to use to help review information was something called daily repetition method. The idea is that you have to constantly keep up reviewing information almost every day to ensure that you will almost never forget it, or at least you have it ingrained enough to your memory that you don't need to give any further review. And it really emphasizes the rule to review almost every day. For clarification, daily repetition method and rote learning, they both sound like they are the same method, but here is the little difference. Rote learning is how you approach memorizing new information, information. Daily repetition method is how you approach reviewing old information to get consecutively as many days as you can to review information, which I am not a big fan of doing, because daily repetition method is not flexible and convenient for me to do unless I am more dedicated and committed to make it work. But overall, looking at daily repetition method, I think the repetition of reviewing information shouldn't be done over excessively like that, of feeling like I am being pressured to do it every day for a certain period of time to make it work. Instead, I believe it should be done more in a strategical way that is less stressful and more optimal for me to do to realistically keep up with my learning and memorization of knowledge that I want to retain. As used to being a beginner grappler, we are taught that using the daily repetition method with the drilling method is the solution to help combat the forgetting curve. But you have to make sure you do enough of it to be effective, because doing it the traditional way of just drilling a technique you are trying to learn and memorize for an hour one time will not mean you will remember it forever, guaranteed. Just like that. For most people, that is not how it works. Whatever information you just tried to shove to your memory after a session will start to quickly fade away if you don't put effort to try to review and retain it. You need to make sure to continuously and consistently follow up with what you know by reviewing enough to the point where it finally becomes super engraved to your memory, where you feel confident that you don't have to worry about ever forgetting it for a while. And again, if your primary method to learn and memorize new techniques by just using the drilling method, from my understanding is that approaching the drilling method requires that you need to make sure you can drill as much as you can by using the daily repetition method appropriately enough most days of the week, or ideally every day if you can. That way you can have a higher chance to constantly memorize, review, solidify, refine, and build from what you know or what you want to learn. And if you can't do that daily repetition method alongside the drilling method of following the traditional way, then you will find it to be more harder or not as effective to learn and memorize Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu techniques by using only the drilling method at unorganized random times. That's why, going back to when I say using the drilling method as the only way to memorize techniques is not always practical for me, because I almost have to do it every day using the daily repetition method to ensure that I am able to use, review, and retain the knowledge. My reasons why I believe it is not practical or convenient for me to consistently do is that there are just so many requirements to prep beforehand in order to drill effectively that I find has friction and obstacles that can be annoying at times. There's finding the right partner, scheduling, finding a place to train, going there, and if all goes well, finally meeting up to actually drill. But there can be other possible variables or problems to deal with when it comes to trying to drill. I just want a way that could make the process of reviewing and retaining Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu techniques frictionless, of not requiring a lot in order to do and be more in my control, in a way to work well enough that even if I ever planned to drill with another person and they cancel on me the last minute, which is alright, cause we all got things going on in our life. All I am saying from all of this is that nothing ever always goes smoothly, that there are variables that can disrupt the traditional way of training. That includes if I got sick or I am injured and can't physically train for months. I want to have a backup plan that I could still do in order to at least help review and retain knowledge of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu techniques, which is why I find my lazy method to be very reliable in such cases. Overall, I just don't want to deal with a hassle or problem when it comes to trying to drill almost every day. Again, I think I am not that committed enough yet to do it that way. In a way, what I am saying is that I want to drill as little as possible. I don't want to feel pressured to do it every day, and I just want to make the overall experience of learning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu techniques more convenient process of being able to just jump straight into memorizing and reviewing anytime and anywhere I want, without having for me to plan ahead or think about it. I wanted to find the best review method to help me retain the knowledge of techniques much easier and convenient for a lazy guy like me. Something I can do that doesn't require me to do every day or have obstacles to jump over. So with the time I spent researching and experimenting, I found that the best and most effective repetition review method that fits my needs, that works alongside with my lazy method, and that is something called spaced repetition. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, it's a memory review method where you are spacing out what you want to review in a wide range of intervals over time. And it has been shown effective to flatten the forgetting curve, meaning this reviewing method I found can effectively help make retaining information in much longer periods in a way that doesn't require me to always need to review the material as much. Or another way to put it, that I don't need to constantly stress in trying to review something every day in order to have it stick to my head long term. I can space it all out and be able to review the material more comfortably and conveniently within my control. Spaced repetition method is generally considered more effective than daily repetition method for several reasons. Optimal timing for review. Spaced repetition involves reviewing information at increasing intervals, which helps reinforce memory just as it begins to fade. This timing enhances long-term retention better than daily repetition, which can lead to diminishing returns. Memory consolidation. By spacing out reviews, the brain has more time to consolidate information, transforming it from short-term to long-term memory more efficiently. This process takes advantage of how our brains naturally strengthen memories over time with proper reinforcements. Reduced cognitive load. Spacing out study sessions reduces cognitive load, preventing burnout and making it easier to focus during each session. Daily repetition can lead to fatigue and decreased effectiveness over time. Enhanced retrieval practice. Spaced repetition forces the brain to actively retrieve information, strengthening neural connections and making it easier to recall information in the future. This active recall is more effective than passive review. Better engagement. By varying the intervals and mixing up the material, spaced repetition keeps learning sessions more engaging and less monotonous compared to daily repetition, which can become tedious and less stimulating. Efficiency. Spaced repetition optimizes study time, allowing learners to spend less time reviewing material while achieving better retention compared to the constant grind of daily repetition. Overall, spaced repetition leverages the brain's natural learning processes, leading to more efficient and effective long-term retention of information. Again, spaced repetition works by presenting information at increasing intervals, counteracting the natural tendency to forget, and thereby reinforcing memory over time. For example, I have a flashcard that I use for memorizing a technique, and on the front is the name of the tutorial of the technique, and on the back is the lazy code I wrote for that tutorial. My process in how I review it is that if I am able to read this code on the back successfully enough that I could confidently judge to be an overall successful review process, in being able to understand the code to recall the knowledge associated with the technique video tutorial of this card, then I would confidently determine that I won't need to see and review this specific card again for another 2 days. And once 2 days has passed, and if I am able to successfully review this card again, then I would increase the card to 4 days of not reviewing it. The more I get the card correct of reviewing this certain technique successfully each time, then the more I keep increasing the length of time of when to review this card again. The goal is to make it so that my memory retention on that specific card is so good that I will rarely ever need to have to review it again, or as long as possible, because the knowledge of that card at that point has become so ingrained to my long-term memory. Spaced repetition leverages the forgetting curve by letting me schedule reviews at key intervals. After learning a new piece of information, I am prompted to review it after a short period, just before I forget it. Subsequent reviews occur at progressively longer intervals, allowing me to reinforce the memory just as it begins to fade again. As a result of applying spaced repetition with flashcards that is written in my lazy code method, I am really able to amplify the retention process. I currently have cards that I won't have to see and review again for 2 years, but I feel confident that when 2 years goes by and I review them again, I can still remember their contents. This is how good the method of spaced repetition is, and I am glad that I am able to apply it well to my method. Now, if I get the card of a specific technique tutorial that I was in the process of reviewing wrong, basically couldn't read my lazy code method that I could judge satisfactory successful enough, or just missing a couple of pieces in trying to interpret the code, or just completely forgot it all, then I will start the review process all over again back to day one, making sure to pay more attention to that specific card in memorizing its contents, revise and edit if necessary, and then work my way back up in getting that card to as many days to years as much as I can of not having to review it again. This way of reviewing information helps me to separate and discern techniques that I strongly memorize to the back of the line, the ones that does not need much attention or priority because I am confident in recalling them, separately away from techniques that I feel that I am weak at recalling and need to work in putting more of my focus and attention to. Overall, spaced repetition has proven by a lot of studies to be very effective and is widely used by people who are in the medical field to help increase their retention to learn complex medical terms, or for people who are language learners to help increase their retention with learning vocabulary. Like I said earlier in the video, I don't use the traditional paper flashcards no more for spaced repetition, because mostly when it comes to organizing a bunch of physical paper cards for spaced repetition, especially when you reach to a point of having hundreds to thousands of them, it just becomes annoying and a hassle to keep track of trying to schedule each card's intervals individually by hand. Instead of doing it that way, I use the application called Anki, which uses digital flashcards instead that are easy to make and carry within my phone. And overall, the Anki software just automates the reviewing and retention process for me. The app is very customizable. You can set the Anki's app's algorithm to the way that you want and making it adapt better in adjusting the intervals of how often you want to review information based on what you think is optimal for your performance. Again, the concept is still pretty simple. If you recall an item correctly, the interval to the next review increases. If you forgot, the interval shortens, ensuring more frequent reviews until the information is retained. No more trying to figure out what cards needs to be separated from the ones that I strongly memorize to the ones that I am having trouble memorizing and need more focus working on. This Anki app will do all the work for me in organizing and figuring out everything. I find this to be more convenient than carrying a bunch of paper flashcards to everywhere I go. And again, it makes it way more convenient of having a computer software tell me what to study, to review, and to improve my memorization retention on each and every flashcards than to figure that out all by myself, mid-maxing in a way that saves some brain energy for other things like trying to figure out what I am going to eat for dinner later or what Netflix show I am going to watch next. So overall, spaced repetition with the Anki software is a really nice addition that I added to my method that helps maintain and increase the retention of memorizing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu techniques to even further long-term memory, and pretty much automates the way I train and study Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, giving me valuable data of which Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu techniques that is giving me the most trouble and what I should focus more on, as well as giving me a sense of progress and control, because the Anki app that I use also has a feature of giving me a bunch of pie charts and statistics of my progress, which I find very helpful because it's motivating to see growth of progress represented as graphs of how much techniques I was able to successfully memorize.